Hello, my name is Peter Combs, and thank you for joining me today. In addition to working as dealers, appraisers, and auctioneers, we also, as you might know, run the website Bidamount.com. It's an Asian and Chinese antiques informational site covering auctions from around the world, including eBay and Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonhams. And it's also a source for learning about the topic of Asian and Chinese art. During the course of every week, we get hundreds of emails from people, who collect, who are interested in different aspects of Chinese art. A number of them have asked if we would do some videos on Chinese enamels and coloring agents used on porcelain. So we thought we'd start with this, Famille Rose. While it would be impossible to say everything there is to say about Famille Rose porcelain and its history, we are on this video going to provide an overview, just an overview of the origin and developments of this enamel and its influence in China. What's known as Famille Rose today was initially discovered by a German doctor named Andreas Cassius. He lived in Leyden. The discovery occurred around 1670. Initially, it was used on glass and later on porcelain at the Meissen factory during the early 1700s. How Famille Rose was introduced to the Chinese porcelain makers and potters can be credited to Italian Jesuits. Jesuits had been going to China since the late Yuan Li period, the most famous of which at that time was a fellow named Matteo Ricci. When Famille Rose first came, it was referred to as Yankai, or foreign colors. Its first use was done during the Kangxi period, toward the very end. Some of the key historical information that we know about the introduction of Famille Rose to the Chinese from Europe came from this fellow. His name was Matteo Ricci. He lived in China from 1711 to 1723. He'd been sent over by the Vatican. He worked as an engraver and a painter in the Manchu court of the Emperor Kangxi. He wasn't much of an artist, but the emperor was fascinated by the colors he brought, and he liked this Jesuit very much. In March of 1716, Matteo Ricci wrote an interesting note to the Vatican. It says, "His Majesty was captivated by our European painted enamels and has gone to every length to introduce them into the imperial workshops that he had set up within the palace. With the aid of these colors used here for painting porcelain and a few pieces brought from Europe, it has been possible to do something. This was just the beginning." A second key and very important part of this story was the arrival of another Jesuit named Giuseppe Castiglione. He came to China in 1715, and he worked with Matteo Ricci. They worked in the imperial workshops and the enamel shops. He was a fabulous painter and a very promising artist, and the emperor took an instant liking to him. By the time Castiglione arrived in China, he was an accomplished painter. The court found his work absolutely fascinating, and he captivated the interest of three emperors during his lifetime there, that of Kangxi, Yongchen, and Qinlong. His work covered not only just floral still lifes like these, the one on the left is one of his earliest known examples, done in 1723. He also painted horses and landscape scenes with figures. This vase is one of the earliest examples of Famille Rose porcelain done during the Kangxi period. The vase was painted around 1720. During this time, pink enamel and overglazed blue with washes of green replaced pretty rapidly Wutsai and Famille Vert. During this transition, it was sometimes referred to as Rose Vert porcelain. The transition from the popular Famille Vert and Wutsai to Famille Rose was rapid, occurring in just a few years. The vase on the left is only a couple of years older than the one on the right. While the shapes changed more slowly, the new colors spread very quickly. Here we can see how the new colors were used in a landscape style, which was a significant shift away from the compartmentalized scenes used previously. Interestingly, the introduction of overglazed blue came just 2 years before the pink tones were introduced. They replaced in most instances the use of underglazed blue on Chinese porcelain when the Famille Rose was used at this time. The ability to shade colors as shown here was vastly expanded once Famille Rose was put into use. Here's a look at both sides of this absolutely superb vase. As you can see, the landscape scene depicted runs all the way around continuously, depicting peacocks and flowers and trees with a good use and a sort of a new use of open space or negative space on the porcelain. And here's a nice close detail of that vase. You can see how well they were able to shade the pinks and the use of the overglazed blue in the upper left. Also, it's interesting to note that the use of green was pretty much still the same as it had been prior to the introduction of Famille Rose. The really big changes began during the Yongchen period. This was when everything really started to come together, especially with the appointment of a new kiln director working for the imperial court. They were able to achieve absolute perfection in the decoration of porcelain. Famille Rose reached its peak of refinement during the Yongchen and early Qianlong periods under the directorship of a man appointed by the Emperor Yongchen. His name was Tang Ying. He remained there until 1756 when he died. He was sort of the creative director and grand overlord of all things porcelain and all decoration. Curiously, he was also a very important tax collector in the region. This new style of painting introduced by Giuseppe Castiglione, shown here on silk. Tang Yin, over at the kilns, recognized how much the emperor liked this and made sure that his artisans copied the work meticulously onto porcelain. And here is an example of what Tang Yin's workers were able to do at the imperial workshops on a porcelain dish. Castiglione didn't decorate porcelain, he painted on scrolls and so forth, but the work was obviously carried forward meticulously under Tang Ying's supervision. And here's a detail of that same plate. Notice the absolutely incredible shading that they were able to achieve with the flowers, especially the blossoming peony in the upper right. It was absolutely incredible, as well as the different colors that they were able to produce on leaves. They did a lot of innovation. Here's a wonderful bowl that was probably made in Qingdechen, but then it was sent to the imperial workshops at the palace, where it was given a coral ground and a Famille Rose decoration over it. The work is outstanding. And here's a back of that same bowl. It's a view of the bottom. It reveals not only the outstanding decoration that was applied in the round just perfectly, but it also demonstrates how incredibly fine the porcelain had become during this period. Thin and very refined and well-shaped. Following the death of Yongchen, Qianlong ascended to the throne in 1736. He was an enormous patron of the arts, and he had a very long reign, which went on for nearly 60 years. And he was perhaps the greatest benefactor and collector of Chinese art in all disciplines in history. He was a scholar, after all, and when you're by far the wealthiest person on earth, you can do a lot of collecting. The innovations which took place with the encouragement and support of the emperor increased exponentially during his reign. Pieces like this Hu-form vase were being made. They were based on classical bronze-form wine vessels. The designs were, however, something very new, and they were an enormous success. Here's an interesting example of some of the innovations that took place during this period. It's a pair of altar vases with a Famille June ground on a sort of a modified double gourd with bowls on top of lotuses done in Famille Rose pink. And the main body of the vase itself is a celadon ground covered with gilding. It's a very interesting combination and quite successful. And on the idea of innovation, there is this. It's a fine yellow ground revolving vase with a reticulated body. The interior has another vase inside that the holder can peek into through the openings. It also rotates. The potters were encouraged to create things to amuse the emperor. He was very, very fond of these sort of interesting objects. They also produced bowls like this early in the Qianlong period. The French influence on it is pretty obvious with the Rococo cartouche encircling the fairly classical flower and basket scene seen in so many Chinese pieces. And you have this nice crapato ground in light blue running all around it, framing the entire scene. Here's a good detail of that same bowl up nice and close. Pretty obviously the work of the Imperial workshops. Excellent grading and shading all the way around it, and these absolutely superb colors. Another form which became very popular during the era, not only in porcelain but in Beijing enamels, were vases with faux silk relief work and bows. Notice how wonderfully they make it look as though it's wrapped around the shoulder of the vase. Love the knots. Spectacular quality. Another type of vase that became extremely popular were these multi-sided vases with alternating panels of flowers and vertical cartouches of script poems running down the sides. They were wonderfully done and did a beautiful job with these sort of lotus-shaped cartouches framing each image. The rest of the vase was decorated profusely with enamels and deep pink multicolored groundwork. During the late Qianlong period, mid to late Qianlong period, they began producing more of these, with these hunting scenes, very reminiscent of pieces that you saw that were done in underglazed blue and Famille Vert during the Kangxi period. They began doing them again in fairly large numbers in Famille Rose. They were highly successful. During the Jiajing period, they continued to make vases like this, these multi-sided affairs with, again, vertical panels of script and flowers. But the quality had begun to decline. As you can see, the painting isn't quite as refined. The script isn't as carefully placed. The groundwork above and below isn't of the same quality that we had seen during the Qianlong period. Still a fine vase, but not a great one. During this time, they also continued to produce sort of curiosities like these, a pair of court ladies holding up vases serving as candlesticks while they're standing on the backs of dragons. Like I said, these were made for export primarily, and they were very good quality, perhaps not quite up to the quality of the work done in the previous reign. I didn't mention anything about the Daoquan period because most of their best work was very similar to the work that was done during the late Jiajing period. After the Daoquan period ended, very little great porcelain was produced in China until the Guangxu, starting around 1875 when a number of the kilns were brought back and some imperial orders were made, and the quality of the porcelain rose back to some very high levels, as shown here. By the late 19th and early 20th century, vast quantities of these fine porcelains and other art, all kinds of Asian art, Chinese art, flooded into the West and into Japanese collections. It was due largely to economic issues plaguing China, resulting in a decline of the power of the imperial house, which eventually collapsed completely in 1912. These collections remain to this day, though. This is just one room at the Metropolitan Museum. They had many. Well, that's about it. Thanks so much for visiting today, and if you want, sign up for our YouTube channel here so you can subscribe. We do one every week, and I hope you enjoy them. And if you want to learn more about Chinese art or antiques, or you need to look up something, visit Bidamount.com. If you go to the site navigator page, probably the best place to start. There's a whole menu of things on there that you can look up things from, and it's pretty handy. And thanks again.